Welcome to Lean by Design Podcast, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the complex, ever-changing world of biotech, pharma, and related industry, where we explore the relationship between people and workflow design. I'm your host, Oscar Gonzalez, alongside my co-host, Lawrence Wong. Come along as we learn from industry experts as they deliver practical tips and tell inspiring stories that have shaped their careers. Welcome back to another episode of Lean by Design Podcast. I'm your host for this episode, Oscar Gonzalez, with my co-host, business partner, friend, and I'm excited today, my guest, Lawrence. Say what is up to our listeners.
Hey, how's it going? Episode 2, we're moving right along.
Episode 2, we're knocking one down and getting another one started. Lawrence here has vast experience over 10 years in systems engineering, process engineering, quality engineering, basically just a lot of engineering. Was at, I saw this in your bio, also the High School of Math and Science Engineering. I want to hear a little bit more about that because I went to a standard public school, so very interesting. Got his bachelor's in mechanical engineering through Northeastern, and then got his MBA in health sector management through Questrom, which is Boston University's School of Business. And that is actually where we met. So quite an extensive space there. I know you started out doing a little bit of work in Genzyme, and most recently I've been working with Bristol Myers Squibb right around the corner from me, just about 10 minutes away. So super excited to have you on our podcast. And really just excited to learn a little bit more about your background. You're originally from New York. What part of New York are you from?
Brooklyn.
What pushed you out here into Massachusetts, and what about Brooklyn do you think kind of molded the way that you think about business and engineering, I guess, in that aspect? How did that path happen that you decided you wanted to go into engineering?
Yeah, so I guess to the point about going into engineering. So I think in high school I was very good at math and science, and so the obvious choice was to go into engineering. There wasn't really much I would say further thought than that. I think the only other choice was looking at what specific discipline within engineering. So I was toggling between either chemical engineering or mechanical engineering, and I ultimately chose mechanical just because of the physics, and I'm not a huge I would say fan of learning all the intricacies of chemistry. And funny enough, I was terrible at biology in college, but I ended up in biotech.
It's so funny that you say that, because I feel like all of these things you said, they tell you when you find a business partner, make sure that they compliment you. And these things that you said you hated, I absolutely love biology. Physics is so fascinating to me, and I enjoyed it so much. And to be honest, mechanical engineering, for me was a little bit of a snooze fest. So it's interesting to see that kind of, dynamic. I guess, where did you get that influence to suggest engineering?
Yeah, so there's definitely nobody in my family that is in engineering. And the influence from engineering, I guess, again, right, it's really just coming from my own kind of, I would say, favorite subjects in high school, which were math and science. And I went into the interwebs of whatever Google, and I typed in, what majors are using math and science skills, and engineering popped up. It also was in one of those, I don't know, maybe US Weekly lists of, these are the most popular majors, and you can potentially make whatever money coming out of school. And so that was the appeal from my end. But there was, very little, I would say, influence from my family or my parents related to engineering. And that was kind of the way growing up. It was more of like, hey, if you're interested in it, go ahead and figure it out and see if you like it.
So it was really, I'm good at math and science. So that kind of pointed you to engineering, and you looked at basically a Google search that suggested mechanical engineering and you can make this amount of money. Did you, at that point, did you really understand what mechanical engineering was about? Or was it more of, I have these attributes and it looks like I can make a living out of it, so let me just go in this direction?
Yeah. So in high school, at first, the first couple of courses that you take related to engineering are more on the architectural side. So learning how to do CAD drawings on the computer, you're doing some of these, I would say, more advanced physics classes where you're looking at structures and looking at how stresses impact certain materials. So that was somewhat interesting to me. But outside of looking at those areas, there wasn't much, I would say, person that I looked up to per se that was in mechanical engineering. Again, it was more of like I'm interested in that. Engineering seems like it matches up with what I like, so I'm gonna do that course load. And I had no idea what I signed up for. I would say after the second semester, because you have all the core classes or whatever, and it's usually some of the same stuff that you learn in high school. I think it's more of like making sure that all the students are level as they progress to the higher level courses.
So, you finish, you leave the high school of math, science, and engineering, clearly going on the engineering path, and you go out to Northeastern. So was there a rationale behind where you wanted to go to school, that you wanted to come out and move to Boston? I've seen that a lot, and so what kind of drove that decision to you? Is the engineering program there? Is it standing above the rest? What brought you out to Boston?
Yeah, so engineering definitely did not bring me out to Boston, and the person that actually brought me out to Boston was my mother when she was looking at all the different colleges that her and my dad would be ultimately paying for. And so we have a very close family friend that lives in Randolph here in Massachusetts. And so she thought, hey, it's a good idea that you get out of New York City and go perhaps, pursue your education somewhere outside of this place. And so that, I want to kind of do a little bit of a divergent story about how I ended up at that high school that you had mentioned about. And again, that was one of the most insane decisions that my mother made. And so the way that the New York City I would say high school process works is that you fill out an exam and for those specific charter schools. And so I taken the exam. I didn't really get the highest score, but I did get a score high enough that I qualified to fit at one of these high schools. And so it was either that high school, and then the other school I got into was Brooklyn Technical High School, which was closer to home. And so the high school for math, science, and engineering was this new school that was kind of a somewhat related to the City College of New York. And so they had a pretty well known, I would say, engineering program within the city. And so my mom said, hey, you should go over there. You're good at math and science. And so I ended up there, which that school is located in Harlem in Manhattan. And I lived near Coney Island. So I think it was around, I don't know, like a 13, 14-year-old kid taking a hour and a half train ride to Spanish Harlem to go to high school.
Was that
Um,
every day?
so that hour and a half was one way. So I spent 3 hours a day on the New York City public transit.
So let me get this right. This is going to be one of those instances that you'll tell your grandkids, "Oh, I used to, an hour and a half going through, the city by myself. I was a little kid and I went to high school every day, an hour and a half to get there. It took me 3 hours all day." This is going to be one of those stories, I think.
Oh yeah, this is definitely one of those things where I talk about it with my mom sometimes, and I'm like that was why did you send me with that? That was such an insane choice, but
Wow, that's a lot of trust right there to,
yeah.
my experience on, trains and, subways and things like that, is actually from when I came to Boston 10 years ago. And I'll be honest with you, I was terrified. I was like, I don't know what's happening. I hope I'm going to the right place. When I get out, I'm so disoriented with even what direction I'm facing. So, kudos to you to figuring that stuff out when you're 13. That's insane.
Yeah, and to kind of reflect on it now, and that decision by her, I think now that I have a matured and been out of high school for over a decade, probably even more, is I think my mom felt that it was more advantageous for me to go to that school and have that experience rather than be closer to home and to be comfortable and to have convenience around. So that taught me at a very young age, like, hey, you got to get out of your comfort zone to get the things that you want. And so, there's a ton of travel that I did in terms of riding the subway every single day. I saw a lot of crazy things that probably a kid at that age probably shouldn't see, but that was life. And I was so used to the hustle and bustle of New York City. So, going directly into the heart of Manhattan and then riding the train all the way up the Upper West Side and walking to school. And so I compare that to, moving up to Boston, and it was a huge, I would say, just shock in terms of the different people that I used to interact with in New York City versus the people that I'm interacting with up here. And so there's definitely a difference between a New Yorker versus a person from who is from New England, right? And so I would say it's still, here there's a lot of that hustle, and people are very driven and motivated in their career. But in New York City, it was just a lot of immigrants that were living there at the time, and it definitely wasn't the safest place, I would have to say. So moving up here was definitely nice in that respect to see how much safer it is, and not have to walk down a block without turning my shoulder to be like, oh, is somebody behind me? And so I found a home here, and since coming up for school in 2008, I just never went home.
Yeah, it's been I'm about to hit my 10th year as well, and it's interesting to kind of transplant yourself and say this is my home. And so I can totally second that feeling.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Thank you to our sponsor, Lauren Perna Communications, a Boston-based digital communications firm for life sciences, healthcare, and mental health companies. Life science companies have an important story to tell, but it's not always easy with the industry jargon. Lauren and her team turn your technical talk into compelling content that feels authentic to your brand and resonates with your audience. If you need help with your digital content or copywriting, visit laurenperna.com to learn more about how they can tell your company's story.
You got here 2008, just after high school, starting at Northeastern, doing mechanical engineering. There was a gap between when you got your degree and when you decided to do your MBA. Similar to myself, there's a large gap for myself. When was that moment where you thought, hey, maybe it makes sense for me to look at an MBA and see what is available? What can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I decided to pursue my MBA. I think it probably was around maybe 3 or 4 years after graduating from undergrad. And so at the time, I was working full time at Sanofi, which used to be, I guess, Genzyme. Um, and so there were a lot of, I would say, responsibilities that I took on that were very closely related to what my education was. But I think that was a huge part of my identity. And I didn't want to bucket myself and call myself an engineer and do that for the rest of my life. I think there were other things that I saw that were interesting, but because I was an engineer, I wasn't able to do those things. And so, in my mind, a way to kind of elevate yourself and to learn more about just how the business works was to go back to business school. And so, at the time, I had a lot of student debt, and I said, well, who's going to pay for this if I can't afford it? And so the options were, okay, I got to find a company that will sponsor the graduate degree, and that's what I did. I actually applied full time to both Harvard and MIT, and I didn't get in. And so I took the part time route, which was going to Questrom, and then the rest was history.
With that, were you already considering to come to Boston, or was grad school kind of, well, you were already here for Northeastern, so you had already been sticking around. Did you have any kind of thought as to, if I don't go to school, am I going to go back to New York? Or once you came to Boston, was this, did this feeling of this is home, did that kind of stick with you the whole time?
Yeah, so that definitely the home part definitely stuck with me, and obviously people change throughout college. So I went from being a very, I would say, moving in New York is always 24/7. Like people are always moving around doing stuff, and once I finished school and started to work for a little bit, I actually enjoyed the peace and quiet away from the city and just
In
being
Boston,
around in Boston.
the
I
peace
to
and
me,
quiet in Boston.
so
That
to
is
me, I think Boston is a lot of peace and quiet compared to growing up in Brooklyn and taking the train through Manhattan and going to school in New York. So um, I found a home here, and I enjoy it here. There's a lot to do, and it's very close to driving, maybe an hour away, and you can do hiking and just be in the outdoors, which was something that I didn't get to do growing up. So that is it's definitely been a nice thing for me to enjoy while being up here, and I met a lot of friends here that ended up staying after school, so it just made sense to stay here.
yeah. I think you experience something that a lot of folks do, that when you come out into this area, you're so close in proximity to these to all these different states. It's just like, oh yeah, 20 minutes away you're in New Hampshire or Vermont or New York or Connecticut. So I think that lends a lot of opportunity. And of course, I've learned a new term over the years of leaf peepers. So it's fun to see the leaves changing up here before they start to the leaves start to change down south. We have this time between Northeastern and Questrom. What is your mindset with going into grad school? 2017, getting started, first semester. What's on your mind? What is your plan going into grad school?
Yeah, so going into grad school, I had always, had these career aspirations coming out of school, and I wanted to be maybe a director of engineering at some point, maybe have a larger organization under, my management, and really drive certain initiatives and projects to completion while working for a big company. And so I needed to understand what were the other functions that were inside of a business outside of engineering, and how does engineering play a role in how those decisions get made at those other functions, right? And so, my mindset was I'm going to, go to this part-time MBA program. I'm going to continue working, but at the same time, use some of those skills to help me promote myself at work and perhaps get a higher level position. And so the other part of it was I chose to do health sector management. So being in biotech, you're often, I would say, insulated from the other parts of healthcare on the either the provider side or I would say on the insurance side. So there was a bit of a mystery into how those pieces tied into industry, and how does that whole system work. And I think without going through the program, I wouldn't have realized all the complicated relationships that these groups have, and to understand why our healthcare system is so expensive and where we're headed towards with some of these programs that we have coming from the government. And so, learning about both the healthcare sector as a whole, and then learning about all the other business functions, I believe that time that would put me in a position to take on higher management positions coming out of school. Now, obviously, uh, that was great going into it, but as I learned throughout school, was that I don't have to be in engineering forever. And so I started to look around and to see where I could perhaps add value, whether it be finance, or maybe I should be in strategy or operations. And so I couldn't decide on where I wanted to end up. And so I actually was looking at perhaps doing consulting at some point. And so I took that class, starting new ventures, and we met, and obviously there were a lot of similarities in the terms of how you approach your work within the life sciences, as do I, and looking at how you can make things more efficient, because I understood how inefficient working at a large company was at the time.
Oh yeah.
And so that really piqued my interest, and we have collaborated since then. So
it's talking about that and being in that class. Do you recall the first day of that class starting new ventures? Do you recall kind of how the class started?
The thing that I do remember at the beginning was that we had to come up with some ideas and then we had to like make a pitch.
We had to pitch to everyone
Right.
in the classroom. And I remember I decided to sit on the very edge. It's a U-shaped stadium seating. So each row behind you is a little bit higher and so on. And sitting on the edge, I thought, okay, cool. Like I'm just going to sit here. And as soon as the class over, I can just, pop right out the door and head home. And I remember him saying, okay, everyone, this is starting new ventures. Your class project is essentially going to be developing a venture, with all the bells and whistles. Let's start with you over here on the left. And he pointed right to me. And I remember, I had multiple ideas, some that are more baked than others. And the idea that I decided to share was a brewery with Puerto Rican tapas. And everyone kind of listened to it and I explained it and it was, it was fine. And then the next person, I think like wanted to save dolphins. And then the next person wanted to, change pollution. And I thought to myself, man, everyone here, I had the opportunity to say how I'm going to, build something for society. And I decided to lead with beer. So I was a little bit, I was shocked that there was not a resounding yes, more beer, brewery, food. But it was a point where I thought, man, I am in a different in a classroom with a different set of people here than I originally thought.
Yeah, I honestly don't remember what idea I had pitched. But I do remember that, yes, that brewery is still a good idea and it might be planned in the future. So,
Oh, it's a retirement plan. Rest
oh,
assured, it is a retirement plan, and I'm letting all of our listeners know that I will be building a brewery with Puerto Rican tapas in the future. So that is my drop right there. And so, we had this class, and to kind of paint the picture for our listeners, we had to go through a lot of these. We had to first decide who we wanted to work with and what we wanted to work on. So, we had 4 guys on our team, including us. What was your thought? Do you remember your early thoughts on this particular venture that we have essentially made into a functioning company? Do you remember any of those initial thoughts?
yeah. So, I mean, I think the initial kind of, I would say, value that we were providing, that we were going to provide management services around some of these I would say, science related functions that are necessary for a lab to run. So things like managing consumables, maybe tidying up your samples, and then managing your budget. So that would enable you to run a successful lab with however many scientists that you had at the time. And I think we were trying to figure out what that best, I would say, proposition is to a larger company or maybe a smaller company. But there were, I would say, from my end, there were a little bit of doubt in terms of how do we differentiate ourselves from, say a Thermo Fisher or like a Cytiva or some other company that provides some of those services, right? And so we actually struggled for a long time in terms of how we would present that product. Okay, let's say we did want to tackle things like consumables. Okay, well, what is the best way to manage consumables, right? And we quickly realized that there's no cookie cutter process that you can implement at any organization, right? It's your process is always some product of the people that are involved, the types of technology that you have at your disposal, and then whatever policies you have to guide those relationships. And so we quickly went from looking at that to, okay, well, what type of framework would enable us to move those 3 pieces around, both
Exactly right. It's
efficiently and effectively, right?
you know when we started going through, it felt so clear in my mind. And I recall when we first met in that initial class session of, okay, which project are we going to choose? We had a bunch of different ideas. And then I think the idea was, well, Oscar's idea sounds more feasible sooner. And I think it was because we were looking at some project ideas had to do with looking at the payer side of things, which could inevitably involve politics and all of these different factors that we really didn't have a handle of. We really didn't have any way to kind of spearhead something like that, let alone build a project around it and then have to learn new spaces that are not directly relevant to what we were trying to do. And it took some time, and it was a lot of back and forth for us to kind of understand each other and understand what to your point, the value. What is the value of what we're going to be trying to do? At any point, did you get the feeling, I don't think we're going in the right direction and this may not be for me? Or did you have this kind of, I think that I am all in from the beginning? How did you feel throughout that process of getting to where we are today?
Yeah, so I think I kind of want to separate the conversations into two parts. It was the first part being, while we were in school, pursuing this project for the purposes of the deliverable for the class, right? Versus, hey, this actually has legs and we're going to actually attempt to do this and, perhaps leave our full-time jobs and work on this permanently. And so I would say the first part of it where we did have, I would say, specific deliverables that we had to complete for the class. I think at times it felt rushed because a lot of those, I would say, really necessary aspects of building a business, you need time to build these things, right? So it doesn't make sense to, hey, let's do a customer, journey map within a week. And it's like, well, we don't even know what our, core offering is and where are these potential customers located and how do they make the consideration to look for a type of service like this, right? So my opinion at the end of the class was that there was a ton of work to do, and there was, in my eyes, hope of, yes, this could become something because I deal with some of these problems every single day at my job, and I haven't found anything where you could hire a team to figure out systematically where those bottlenecks were in your process. And so I think I may have been, maybe I was you or me, but I think when we had a closing, I would say, meeting after the class, I asked, hey, like, do you guys want to do this for real? And maybe continue working on this? Because I think at the time we were also, that was I would say, a couple months into the pandemic, and most of us, if not all of us, were working remotely. So there was a lot of downtime, I would say, outside from work. And so it seemed like a great opportunity to continue working on this and to build it to what it is today.
Yeah,
And
we did this right from we started class in the classroom, and in the middle of the class where we were trying to build a company, everybody stay home. The whole city of Boston shut down, the US shut down, and now we have to go 100% virtual. And that was such a weird space because we're trying to stay focused, not only for our grade, but, we wanted to actually make good use of the time and make good use of the class. And I agree with you. There's so many aspects that we put into place for the company to build it, to get these things down on paper, but it was so rushed because you're under the confines of your semester. And typically you don't come up with a business plan, a founder's agreement, a budget forecast, you don't come up with all of these things in 3 months while you're also working full-time and in school for other classes. And if you remember, so for starters, it was definitely not me that came up with, let's do this. I think it came because my mind was still trying to graduate. If you remember, you guys, a couple of us finished before, before I was even done. And I said, well, we can do that. I'm still in class for another year. So we had to kind of slowly crawl while we were doing this. And so it was definitely a different experience where we are now. And we've kind of adapted and molded and shifted, but in more of a direction that allows us to deliver exactly what we are what we want to do. I think we've more focused versus previously we were very broad. We didn't really know how to present ourselves, but now we have this layer of focus of this is what we're going to be doing is building these, solutions. And what part of that was what kind of connected with you to say, hey, Lawrence, this is a company that I can get down with, that I can actually be a part of because I see this vision. What part of that building solution, idea really resonated with you?
Yeah, so our I would say process is very much in line with the DMAIC method, right? Which is define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. I think for me, that was very similar to what I was already doing at my current role, where within engineering, usually, typically something would break and there is a whole list of things that you would do to troubleshoot the particular whatever malfunction with your equipment. And so I was already doing a lot of those, I would say, activities within those different phases, but I just didn't know what it was called at the time. And so, as we were pivoting to use that type of framework to solve these problems, to me it was, oh, this is exactly how I think. Like this is a great match for me. Um, obviously there are nuances to depending on what the actual problem is, right? Whether it's a very physical interaction for managing consumables, or maybe it's a workflow issue where you're trying to get some sort of thing approved, and it's not so much something physical, but it's on the on the computer or some database. So that was appealing to me because I was doing both of those things, but I just didn't know what it was called, and it kind of I don't know what you call it, maybe perfect timing, being at the right place at the right time. But I gravitated towards, getting a deeper understanding of how can I solve problems more efficiently and more effectively. And this was an opportunity for me to grow in that way, right? Because in my mind, I always like I know enough about things not to make a mistake, but I'm never the one to say that I know everything because I'm always constantly learning, and there are a million things that I'll never figure out, but um, I am not afraid to get my hands dirty and to be in those processes, be in those operations, to say, okay, I've done that in the past, that hasn't worked out well, and these are the reasons why, and to really help people shift their mindset into to telling them work doesn't have to be this difficult. There are easier ways to do things, but you have to make the effort to be self-aware and to admit to, not only yourself but also to the team, like, hey, this is causing everyone a lot of stress, and we're losing a lot of either time, money, or resources to some of these very wasteful operations that I've seen happen. And to have the opportunity to come in there and say, okay, what is the requirements for your process? Who are the people involved? What type of technology you're using? What SOPs you have in place, to have an influence to make the workplace an easier place to be is something that I'll do that all day, every day.
It's funny that you mentioned about, having this knowledge, but admitting that you don't know everything, because I think what you're describing there is having that sort of horizontal exposure to where you have a certain set of knowledge, but you may not have this vertical, deep knowledge base of the theory and the like, with all these different processes that exist within biotech and pharma. And I can't agree with you more and be more. I have those same experiences as well. And I think what that's allowing you to do is not only look at the area, the space that you're working in, but also understanding all of the ancillary processes that actually either feed into it or receive the output of that particular process. And when you have that layer of understanding, it I think it completely shifts, as you said, it shifts your mindset into, I don't need to just solve this. I need to bring the back end and the front end along with me for the ride so that we can actually have something that flows in all directions. Because you may have an output, a simple output as a PDF, when the person on the next receiving end actually needs an Excel file. And when you don't have that communication happening, and that's part of it too, is being an expert communicator and learning, teaching yourself to be a better communicator so that you can actually tie these different functions together and make sure that your process has involved all of the stakeholders and informed the ones that may not be directly related. So I think that's a great way to put it.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Is your team constantly fighting fires? Are you struggling with productivity and think it's due to inefficiency in your operations? These challenges can be difficult to measure, but not impossible. Sigma Lab Consulting can help you define and prioritize the issues that are negatively impacting your team. We partner with stakeholders to redesign workflows so you can work more efficiently. Find out more at sigmalabconsulting.com.
So we are coming toward the end of our time with you today. So is there anything you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think, from the friends that I know and people that I work with, something that I don't see enough of is people putting themselves in a position to learn more, right? And I think it's, people are often, I would say, preoccupied with not only work, but that you may have a lot of things going on outside of your life, right? But I always feel if you're not at least allocating some amount of time learning, how do you come up with ways to improve some of these processes that you're in, right? It's kind of one of those analogies of, if you don't move, you can feel some of these restrictions around you. And so if you're standing still all the time, you don't understand the resistance until you actually make the move. And so and another analogy is like you're strapping bricks to your feet and you're trying to run, and it's like, well, maybe you should take those bricks off and then you can run faster. But until you move, you don't realize that they're there. And so something that I would tell everybody to do is continue learning, whether it's picking up a class, maybe listening to a podcast, reading, writing, whatever it is, just continue to learn, because if you stay stagnant, then you don't realize what your true potential is. And for me, the more that I learn, the less I feel I really know about everything. And it's this like constant back and forth of like, oh, let me read a little bit about this. And it's like, oh, well, that's actually really interesting. I didn't know that particular industry approached that problem in that way. But if I wasn't curious enough to look into that, I wouldn't have come up with the solution that I came up with within my own project within biotech. So, not only learning about your industry, but also looking across all of the industries, looking at other things that you're interested in and seeing where parallels are with how you can improve the place that you're at.
There you have it, folks. Stay curious, educate yourself, keep gaining information. Make sure that you're constantly learning and having your eyes on all of not just the functions and the industries that are directly related to what you're doing, but those that are kind of on the outside too, to really give you a broader perspective for crafting your solutions. Lawrence, thank you again for sitting and chatting with me. I've learned so much about you, more than I've already known, so greatly appreciate it. And I know our folks do too.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. You've been listening to the Lean by Design podcast. Music is by Alex Grohl and Anton Vlasov of Pixabay. The show is produced by Michelle Gonzalez and hosted by Oscar Gonzalez and Lawrence Wong of Sigma Lab Consulting. Until next time, work smarter before you work harder. Thanks for listening, and if you're interested in being a guest on our show, send us a message at leanbydesign@sigmalabconsulting.com.
Where's my mouse?